Hi, it's Lau. It's a beautiful spring day. I decided to come out for a walk, come out to do a little meditating, and I decided I wanted to address a couple concepts that somebody had asked me. People say to me a lot of times, so as a Daoist, what do you do? And as a Daoist priest, like, what's that all about? Or, I don't really want to do a religious studies, or I'm not really all that spiritual. And I hear this a lot, and a lot of people don't really even understand what the word Taoism means, much less really get the understanding. And I get that. And so I kind of want to have a discussion that comes up, I would say, a lot in pretty much everyday conversation. And that kind of the conversation of why cultivate? Why? And not just Taoism, I mean Buddhism, yoga, Jainism, Sikhism, Sufism. A lot of these paths require a lifetime of commitment. And a commitment that I would say 99%, 98% of the population have no desire to make. And I don't think it's because of laziness or because of some sort of lack of desire to connect to life. I think that a lot of times these things aren't articulated very well. A lot of the academics and the scholars and the poets who talk about Taoism, and people say to me, well, I studied Taoism a little bit, I read the Tao of Pooh, and I'm like, just so, yeah. Or they even go to the classics like the Tao Te Ching or the Chuanzi, and they say, yeah, that's Taoism. And I say, okay. Alan Watts talks about talking to a Zen master once, and the guy said, if you understand Zen, you could read the phone book, right? But what would you have to read, or what would you have to do to be a Taoist? The answer is nothing. You don't have to read something or do something to be a Taoist. It's a way you look at life. But why would you look at life that way? That's what I want to discuss right here. The life of a cultivationist is a life that sees into things, that sees a connection to all things. Many people wake up to an alarm clock. They drink their coffee because they need their stimulant. They have their appointment book so they can keep everything in line, because you have to do all these things in a day. And they make time to have coffee with friends, or tea with friends, or lunch with friends, or some sort of eating ritual socially with friends. And then they turn and they go and they pick up a movie or pick up a bottle of wine on the way home so they can quicken the blood and they can gladden the mind and maybe drink a little to excess. And they lament about why this relationship's not good and why that person did this and my mom did this. And then they get closer to bed and they either have somebody but they feel close to someone else, or they feel a million miles apart from the person they sleep next to, or they don't have somebody and they feel like the whole world has somebody and I don't. And there's this quiet life of desperation which eventually leads to going to sleep and waking up and doing it all over again. And people say that's life. People say it's life. Some people find purpose. We've talked about purpose in other videos. They talk about purpose. I volunteer, I go to church, I travel, I find my identity in my work. I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm an activist, I'm a hacktivist. But all of those things are actions, and they don't necessarily have depth, and they don't necessarily fulfill the soul. Humans who look for happiness will never find it, because to look for happiness is to find everything else, and then you have to go in through everything else, and it's a losing proposition. It's a red herring. I've said before that a life of purpose, now that's the way to go. But most people really resonate with the idea that I wasn't born to wake up, pay bills, and die, and yet they don't really live very far off from some permutation of that idea. What does a cultivationist do What makes a person who follows the way? Almost every tradition, Christianity originally was called the way. Judaism, many parts of the Pentateuch talk about an angel or the Lord keeping him in the way. The Dharma, is path of the way. There's a lot of this idea, and what is that way? It's a way you relate to the world around you. You see me in nature. Most people see Daoists in nature. But what does that mean to be in nature? It means that at any given moment, on a spring day, there's so much growth. And yet I see all these dead leaves on the ground. And I see ants crawling up and building mounds. And there are termite damage on these trees over here. There's constant creation and constant destruction. And all of it taken into context of this forest makes it a beautiful forest. But it's beautiful even though I see a lot of detritus. I see a lot of death. I see a lot of plant massacre and macabre. But as a cultivationist, I come in here and I see all of it happening, and I can say to myself, self, this is the way things work. Things are born, things live, things die. And I was born, I'm alive, and one day I will die. But just as these trees die, new sprouts come out of them. Just as this tree collapses and decays, it enriches the soil and new sprouts come out. So is there really death at all? What I'm doing right now is showing you the inner workings of a thought of a person who cultivates. That is the way I look at the world, the actual way the world works? Or should I suspend the way I see the world and actually see how the world works, free from my labels and meanings? Can I let the world tell me how it works? And the hardest part for humans, can I accept that that's just the way it works? You see, people get into relationships with one another. Then those relationships sprout and beautiful growth, and there's spring, and there's love, and there's twitterpated, and there's lots of frolicking. And then there's a summertime where there's, laziness, and there's cultivation, and there's a lot of activity. And then there's fall, where it's not quite like it used to be. The heat's not really there. Then the winter, or the winter of our discontent, where, why am I with that person? What was I thinking? Who was I? Who are they? You see, everything goes through the same cycles. This is a normal thing. If you stay through the winter, there'll be another spring, if you want another spring. But most people, they don't last through the winter. Like some of these trees, they'll die, simply because they didn't have deep enough roots in very firm ground. This sounds very philosophical. Of course it is, because philosophy means the love of wisdom. It's a Greek term, the love of wisdom. In the ancient traditions of the Gnostics, Sophia was the embodiment of divine feminine wisdom. When people cultivate, they see these things around them and they look and they say, maybe life isn't happening to me. Maybe life's just happening. Maybe if I put aside my persona, which is the mask I wear during my drama, and I put down my dramatis personae, and I look around and I can see that as you see a human in a forest, but why am I a human in a forest? Why am I not just another creature in a forest? I've seen bumblebees here, I've seen squirrels here, I've seen many things. People think humans are unnatural, yet if I died I would decompose no different than this tree here. We are not unnatural. We are very natural, but we don't understand our nature, so therefore it seems unnatural because our own nature is foreign to us. Our nature has everything from licentiousness, yes, anger, rage. Those are all parts of the baser part of ourselves. Can it be tamed? Of course it can. Can it be understood, worked with, possibly even used to our advantage? Well, that's kind of the point. Or can we eradicate it from ourselves because it's bad? And then we make enmity with our own self. Now, how many people think of the old religious type of scourging themselves to purify themselves? And for what? Because they didn't understand their own nature and somebody else told them nature instead of observing it directly for yourself. Why cultivate? Why practice the Tao? Very simple. And again, I don't use the word Tao as in Chinese esoteric, philosophical, religious system. I don't mean it that way. The Tao is just a word to connote this extremely large and ineffable current that flows through all things. This life force. You can find it in Sufism. You can find it in Hermeticism. You can find it in Gnosticism. You can find it in the Orthodoxy too, if you know what you're listening for. But why enjoin yourself to that? Why look deeper? During the Age of Enlightenment, during the Renaissance, these were men and women who looked deeper into the world and found things like alchemy. They found things like philosophy and theurgy. They found things like astrology. And while they may seem like hokey, superstitious things, yes, hokey and superstitious people do use them to explain the world because they don't have any other way to do it, and it matches their emotional and superstitious profile. But that's not a pejorative, because at least they're doing something, yeah? But it was a way to find out how does the macrocosm work, and you'll find that it works the same as the microcosm, and how to match the microcosm to the macrocosm that you can live in harmony, and find out that heaven and hell are just real estate you create. Just heaven and hell are real estates. The worst times in your life can also be the best times of your life, but you have to have the skill to be able to see that. You have to be able to control the most important thing that you, regardless of how long you meditated for, if you just started today, if you're going to start in 5 minutes, if you started 50 years ago, the hardest thing a human can ever gain mastery over is their focus. Some people say you have to master yourself. All you're mastering when you master yourself is your focus. What do you focus on? If you focus on what you have, you'll have gratitude. If you focus on what you don't have, you'll have deprivation and lack and bitterness and resentment and jealousy. But you have to control your focus. What does a mystic like a Daoist or a Buddhist or a Sufi do differently? They control their focus at every moment. The Sufi who says, Inshallah, by the will of God, because he's focusing on what he considers and understands as God at every moment. You can say it's an anthropomorphic thing, maybe it isn't. You determine that. That has to be right for you. The cultivationist finds what's right for them and works with that, but they work on focusing. Whether you work in finance, whether you work in retail, whether you work as a janitor, whether you work as an executive, it doesn't matter where you work. Can you control your focus and see that all you're doing in that environment is the same thing as if you were a priest or a nun or anywhere else? The trappings may seem differently, but the labor is the same. You are people taking care of people, trying to help them better their lives and thereby bettering your own life. That fundamental ground can be found across all work if you want to find it. But if it's dog eat dog in competition, well, you'll find that too. Focus is everything. So the answer to the question is why cultivate? Because if you can't control your focus, every little keys jangling, every little shiny thing, every little inflammatory remark will catch your focus, and you will be constantly beset upon, and therefore you will be the victim. You will be the one being imposed on. You will be the one being harmed. I don't think you want to be that person. But you will be until you can gain mastery and control over your own focus. How do we do that? First, you've got to see your patterns. You've got to see the patterns that you're living in. There's a pattern. Things you say, things you do, things you focus on. Those 3 patterns create who you are at any given moment. Once you see your patterns, you have to learn that as long as you stay in those patterns, you'll never get a different result. So what do? You change the pattern. But when do you change the pattern? The most important time to change a pattern is when you're in the situation. That's the second step. First step is to realize your patterns, but you've got to learn to see those patterns in the moment when they're happening and then make a different decision. So if your pattern is, I'm driving along, traffic happens, I gotta get somewhere, oh, I'm so angry, why is this happening to me? This is not fair. Well, you're using your body in a very certain way, you're tensing, you're seeing what you're not getting to do, the stupid people, the language you're using, you're focused on not getting your way. Or you could realize you always worry about not having enough time. Well, now you're sitting in a car, no one's bothering you, so guess what? Can't go anywhere, but don't need to at this point because there's a car in front of you. You have every logical reason why, and so therefore take that time to rest and breathe, put on a book, on Audible or something, do something for yourself. Take that time, that is mandatory self-care time. You've changed your focus, you've changed your language, and then your body relaxing, you've changed your physiology. Changing the pattern in the situation is the only way. I cannot help you overcome your fear of heights if we don't go to altitude. We can't go to sea level and overcome a fear of heights. It won't work. You've got to go to altitude. So the only way you can break these patterns is when you're in the situation. And once you break that pattern, the last step is to take that situation which caused this really untoward or negative pattern and find the way that you want to behave, find the way that you want to respond instead of react. And every time you get in that situation, practice, 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 practice. Link that new behavior, that new pattern to that old detrimental or negative situation, and then you've personally mastered yourself. You've personally cultivated yourself. This is the basic nuts and bolts, 1, 2, 3 steps of cultivation. That's all a cultivationist does. He learns to respond with love, respond with peace, respond with understanding for himself and all those around him. That may seem hokey, that may seem sappy to some, but it leads to brotherly love and people taking care of each other versus enmity and treating other people like they're objects. So that's why cultivate. That's why learn the philosophy. That's why learning to master your focus. Because then you want peace in the world? Simple, do that. You will have peace in your world every day and twice on Sunday. Doubt me? See for yourself. I don't ask for your faith. Directly experience it for yourself by doing it. If you have any questions, if you want me to explain anything else to you, please don't hesitate. You can leave a comment or hit like, or you can write me an email at lao@fourdragonschool.com. Until then, we'll see you next time.